Terrors, an enigma wrapped in hate and fury, candy-coated with benevolence and longing. Quite decent people, so long as you don't give them a reason to pick up their rocks. High Imperial Knight Ch.6 True Blade. Terran have at their disposal the most dangerous, destructive, insane and mad arsenal than the infinite universe will never contain. But the source of their success, their most terrifying, powerful, devastating, unstoppable weapon is not something they build. It's something they wear like a simple coat, shared with others as easily as they breathe, and so commonplace for them that they don't even notice it anymore. Freedom. Because once you've tasted Terran freedom, there's no going back to the illusion of peace you've previously built. With a taste of Terran freedom, even the most slavish and obedient caste breaks its chains, the most avid entrepreneur chokes on the new products it acquires, while the rulers are frozen by the multiplicity of choices available to them. And all of them will be ready to die, to buy, to negotiate, for more of this freedom. Freedom. Horrible, horrible freedom. Excerpt from The Unseen Weapon of the Terrors, Unger's, New Telkin Press, 4281 New Age. Bob Co. We provide what you need, whether you know it or not. Bob Co. slogan. Rubbing her sensitive eyes, feeling the dry grittiness of exhaustion, Protopit moved through the corridors of the scientific vessel hidden within the terror hulk. The corridor was silent, just the slow, steady hum of hidden equipment hard at work. She passed by the sealed doors, all with labels to show who should be working inside. Offices, labs, computer server farms, everything a scientific expedition ship needed to root out and solve the mysteries of the universe. The door to the main command chamber whooshed open, and she moved forward, to stare at the center holotank. The annoying Trinidad was gone. Instead, there were a dozen other annoying streamers, all of them showing various scenes of primitive life that supposedly members of the scientific expedition were living on the planet below. The annoying Trinidad had back in 5 hours, up, with a countdown. Protopit knew that the annoying insect must have gone offline during the 20 hours that Protopit had slept the sleep of the dead. She had been exhausted, staggering, when she had gone to bed, but her anger had been so great that she had been forced to chew 3 sedation tabs before she could sleep. With a smile, Protopit realized that she had a chance to perhaps counter the insect while it was asleep. One holotank caught her eye, and she moved over to it. It was showing the smaller moon adjusting its orbit, slowing down and then moving in relation to the planet. She knew enough about orbital mechanics to understand that moons did not suddenly change direction, inclination, latitude, and speed. The smaller moon was now in a geosynchronous orbit over the middle of the largest continent on the planet below. Another tank had the 4 different virtual streamers, one for the Emperor, one for Protopit herself, one for Ch.6, and one for a scientific technician named Trogu. All of them were done in cartoon style, with wide expressive eyes, big ears, glittering whiskers, and squeaky voices. Protopit hated her virtual self more than she had ever hated anything in her life. Currently, her virtual self was eating something called Countess Cray's crushed cherry sparkle with Shatterberry's kettle popcorn, her virtual nose buried in the brightly colored plastic bag, her eyes shining with happiness. Protopit wished she could figure out how to strangle her virtual self. After a long moment she turned and looked around. The command chamber was empty, except for her. Frowning, she moved around to the various terminals, seeing that they were all locked out, the users having logged off. She dug in her pocket and pulled out her communicator. She tapped it and waited for the communications section to pick up. It rang and rang. Her frown deepened as she began scrolling through her contacts list, ringing each of the staff officers that served her and the Empire on this scientific expedition. Each number went to messages after ringing. Bruxing her back teeth, Protopit left the command center, heading for the bridge. She would talk to the ship mistress and find out what was going on. The breeze was nice, not too warm, not too cold, stirring just enough to carry the smell of the creek, the flowers, the berries, and sunshine-warmed plants. There were a few puffy white clouds, blamelessly scooting across the clear blue sky. The grass whispered around his pant legs as a Trogu strode around the corner of the path, his whiskers twitching at the scent of vine-ripened streppelberries on the bush the path wound around. Up ahead, by the creek, was a log that had fallen in decades past, and hundreds of urgent discussions had polished and smoothed the reddish-brown wood. Flowers peeked up in the grass here and there, making the creek, the log, and the bushes a living painting. Sitting on the log, in a simple dyed-wool dress, with a bonnet and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, sat a female. She was idly tearing flower petals off of one of the white flowers, tossing the petals into the languorously moving creek. "Draskik!" a Trogu called out. The female turned around, her expression turning from one of pensiveness to happiness. "A Trogu," she replied, waving eagerly. She patted next to her on the log. "Please come sit." A Trogu hurried over, hopping over the log and sitting down. He held out the flowers and the muffin he had brought. "For you," he said. The muffin had chewy honey dates and candy crunches in the fluff, topped with sweet golden raisins. The flowers were delicate pink petals with white edging, a thick green stalk, and shoots of fluffy leaves. "Thank you, a Trogu," she said. She took the flowers and the muffin, set the muffin on the log, and nibbled at the stem of the flowers, closing her eyes and sighing with happiness. She nibbled for a moment, then opened her eyes. "How was work?" she asked. "Slow. We had to grind Weffel grain twice to get it fine enough. The wind is slow today," a Trogu said. "But that doesn't matter now," he smiled as Draskik leaned down to the woven wicker picnic basket at her feet and produced a cool beer in a brown glass bottle, with a wax seal and ceramic stopper held in place by wire. He pushed the wire, and the stop lifted up and fell to the side, still held onto the bottle. The beer tasted good, crisp and clear. He smiled at Draskik as she nibbled at the leaves and stem. It made his heart leap with joy when she smiled back and reached over to hold his hand. The clouds were low and heavy, the threat of rain punctuated by the threatening growl of thunder. The air smelled wet, heavy, the promise of danger and violence making Ch.6's whiskers twitch inside her helmet. Up ahead she could see the red smoke from multiple chimneys. As her heavy mount crested the hill, its lungs heaving as it charged forward, she stood up in her stirrups, raising her pennant-adorned lance. "Ride! Ride for a red sunset!" she roared out. The shield maiden on her right lifted her horn and sounded out the call. Behind Ch.6 the horn blast was repeated to prepare her 150. Horns joined upraised voices as the female DRA. Fulton warrior caste roared out their approval and their anticipation of the coming battle. "A few for the Emperor," calls roared out, as well as "for DRA. Fulton." Below her the village had a wall, but there were farms outside the wall. Barns were on fire, fields that had been harvested smoked and glimmered with sullen coals. The fields around the walled village were covered by hundreds of hulking green creatures, all wearing leather or hide armor, or scraps of captured chainmail torn into strips and hammered into the leather. The weapons were crude, rebuilt cast-offs or poorly forged, but the wielders still chopped at the walls, hacked at any Fulton they could reach, or waved them in the air as they chanted and gave voice to a wordless war cry. Ch.6 leaned forward, tightening her grip on her mount with her knees and hocks, standing up slightly in her stirrups. Her mount responded with an eagerness of its own, snorting mucus and saliva as it roared and charged, the thick rubbery skin bunching with power. In seconds she had moved down the hill, her 150 spreading out into a flying wedge. The shield maidens took the outside, bracing themselves, with the warrior caste sword angels leveling their pennant-adorned lances. The lead greenskins, Orcs from the Badlands to the west, gave a roar back, some turning to face Ch.6's 150, the others still concentrating on the walls of the village. Ch.6's arrival seemed to spur them further, and they tried to climb over one another to assault the walls. On the walls, the town guard, what few of the Emperor's glory remained, and common villagers fired bows and crossbows directly into the faces of the howling orcs. Others used axes, hatchets, a sword here and there, and pitchforks to stab downward into the face, shoulders, and chest of orcs, yanking the weapon back before the vile greenskins could grab the weapon and snatch the defender off the wall. She gave a signal, and her host split into three, the middle going for the besieged gate, the other two sweeping to either side. 50 of the Emperor's angels, 100 shield maidens of the Emperor per group. Ch.6 hit first, her lance slamming clear through 3 of the orcs before she let it go and drew her war axe, laying about her with its keen edge and hammerhead. She held in both hands, chopping at the orcs, kicking away any who got stuck on the cruel blade, even as her mount drove further and further into the mob. Her shield maidens were with her, blocking arrows, spears, swords, even as she ripped through the ranks. Their own blades stabbed around them, pulled free in a spray of blackish blood. "Push them back!" Ch.6 bellowed out, using her heels to kick her mount forward, to use its great weight and strength to force back the greenskins. She saw a goblin lift up the host, wearing rags that did little to hide its pot-bellied and tattooed body, its hair whipping around it, grabbing arrows and crossbow bolts that were suddenly attracted to it. "Witch!" Ch.6 called out. She stood up in the stirrups, pulling the axe behind her head. The foul goblin which began waving her arms, witchcraft glowing in her hands and eyes, her hair snaking around her. Ch.6 threw the axe overhand, the bladed weapon making a quail-like fluttering sound as it whipped nearly 50 paces. The witch's hair reached out, reflexively, to stop it, as if it was a mere arrow or crossbow bolt. 8 pounds of blessed and hardened steel slammed through the protective hair and hit the witch between her saggy exposed breasts. Blood exploded from where the axe hit and from her back as the axe drove clear through her body. The witch fell from the sky as Ch.6 drew her sword and began chopping at the suddenly demoralized orcs. "For the Emperor!" she roared out, sweeping aside an orc blade and kicking the sword wielder in the face, her spur gashing the flesh to the bone, before chopping overhand into its skull with a spray of blood and brains. She was unaware she was smiling. Protulpit stood on the bridge of the Terror War hulk, looking around slowly. It was empty. The computers, installed by the DRA Fulton Empire to replace the destroyed Terror systems, just chuckled right along. The lights were low and pleasing. The entire bridge was clean. Just empty. She moved to the shipmaster's throne and looked down. There, on the red leather seat, was a set of shipmaster rank tabs. They glittered silently in the lights sparkling off of the polished gold. She looked around slowly. "Where is everyone?"